Hey, this is Taylor Loht with the Passive Wealth Strategy Show. If you want to use your small axe to build an empire, you should be listening to the Small Axe Podcast with my good friend, Nico.
Hey guys, it's your boy Nico here from the Small Axe Podcast. I want to show you how to use your small axe to build a lasting empire. You see, not everybody begins their investing career with millions of dollars, a huge network of investors, or the knowledge necessary to become successful in this space, and that's okay. What I focus on here on this podcast is helping you hone your skills, sharpen your tools to become the best investor that you can be. Now, I want you to sit back, relax, and enjoy this show. If you have any questions or you want to reach out to me or the guest, feel free to do so. Love you guys. All right, Small Axe community, it's your boy Nico. Today, I'm hanging out with Taylor Loht. Now, Taylor was originally on our meetup, me and Yosef's meetup, and I just recorded an interview on his podcast. Such a cool dude. He's got a lot to offer, a lot to share, and I can't wait to get him on the show. So here we go. Taylor, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a great time talking with you today. It's a great time talking previously. So I'm excited to talk with your community today.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I'm all jazzed up. We just had a great conversation, and we're going to continue that conversation right now. So let's begin by, taking a few minutes to just kind of talk about yourself, your journey, what you've been through, and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So at heart, I am an investor. The first time I started getting some big boy money, got my first big boy job, if you will, had a couple of nickels to rub together. I wanted to turn them into dimes and quarters. My goal was always to grow my money and find the most effective way to do that. The first thing that I did, the first step that I took financially, other than getting my budget in line, of course, was I read one of these books that's over my shoulder here, The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham. Very thick tome of a book that teaches you about value investing in publicly traded securities. It's what got Warren Buffett started, and he went on to evolve his strategy with Charlie Munger and so on. And that got me started investing in the stock market. I was buying index funds and trading and things like that, and was doing pretty well by the standards of the stock market. But I was dissatisfied because at my core, I realized that my ability to build my wealth in that space was fundamentally limited. I can't take any action that's going to make my shareholdings appreciate. I just kind of need to wait for the market to recognize more value in them, and I can sell them back to the market for more. And that just felt so limiting to me. So I was looking for other options, learning about entrepreneurship, and of course, landed upon real estate, as so many of us here have, as all of your listeners have. Read yet another book, another one over my shoulder here, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Of course, everybody knows he talks about the power of cash flow and business ownership and everything like that, and really dove into the world of real estate investing. And I learned about how real estate investors can buy properties that are under their total performance. I'm going to restate that. And I learned about how real estate investors can buy properties that are underperforming and undervalued, fix them up, and sell them for more later, something you just can't do in the stock market. You can't take that action. Learned about the power of cash flow, which really got me hooked on real estate investing, and so much more that all of your listeners will certainly be familiar with in, the advantages of real estate. But I was really taken aback by all of the horror stories that we all know from the single family investor that, has one property and a terrible tenant, and they've been in there for 2 years and haven't paid a dime. And it's just a big headache and a big hassle. We've all heard those stories, and many of them are very real. Somebody made a mistake, picked maybe the wrong strategy, or, whatever, didn't buy right, all the things. So I didn't want to go down the single family world and down that space. I met a lot of flippers, and flipping just honestly never appealed to me. The tax situation isn't great, and it's just a very active business. I was looking for passive income and passive wealth growth, and landed on multifamily, landed on syndication, a way to partner with others and buy big properties. And I was immediately that's what I want to do. That's how I want to invest in real estate. That set me down the path of starting as a passive investor because at my heart, I am an investor more than anything else. And then got onto the GP side of things. And today in the syndication space, raising investor capital and doing, multifamily syndication deals.
Awesome, Taylor. Thank you, man. Thank you for sharing. I want to backtrack a little bit before we jump forward. So, where are you located, and also how are you funding the first initial investments? I guess you had a W-2 or have a W-2.
Yeah. So where am I located? I'm in Richmond, Virginia. I actually don't invest here though. I invested a lot of time early on in evaluating Richmond as a market for multifamily syndication. There are a few problems. Richmond's a great city and a great area for real estate generally, but the multifamily like volume, if you will, there just aren't enough properties. The market's a little bit too small and it's kind of an old boys club here. So the market never made sense. It took me about 10 months of really working at it. I drove around the whole market and looked at about 80% of the multifamilies over 10 units in the whole MSA. It was a lot of driving around, but I was dedicated to that process. So now I invest in other parts of the Southeast, but funded those initial investments through capital that I had built up through my stock market investing. So started first with a self-directed IRA, which performed well. I was happy with, but a key mistake that I made in that process, it's always the unknown unknowns that get you in this space, at least that have gotten me. And there are a few things that I didn't know about self-directed IRA investing. Of course, there's UBIT or UBTI and UDFI and all those taxes that can apply to leveraged real estate investments in a self-directed IRA. I was aware of those, but I wasn't aware of the importance of picking the right custodian for your self-directed IRA. Frankly, I went around to meetups and talked to people about their self-directed IRAs in the area, smart people, and asked them who their custodian was and just went with that one. That was a big mistake. I should have looked around for other options for custodians that are more responsive, easier to work with. They all kind of have similar fees. Some of them are a little bit higher than others, but it's all those correspondence related things that have really gotten me with the self-directed IRA. So that was the mistake there. It's performed well. That's been great, but it's more of a headache than it should be. So, if you're thinking about self-directed IRA, just shop around for a custodian, get references, and really make sure they communicate in the style that fits you and what you're looking for.
Oh, Taylor, great advice, man. I did not think that question was going to go that way, but that is really sound advice. And, I appreciate that. A lot of my listeners do invest with their self-directed IRAs or are looking to do that. So excellent, man. And where was your first acquisition? And what was we'll talk about your first acquisition.
LP or GP?
Let's go GP.
GP, that was in Amarillo, Texas, up in the Panhandle. Had an opportunity to, work with a team, do a syndication in Amarillo, C-class property. It's funny, you and I just recorded an interview for my show where we talked about your first deal, which was believe you described as a C- class multifamily property. This was a C minus class property, bit older, I think built in the 60s, if memory serves. That deal started back in 2018, no longer hold that, held it for a few years. And, it did well. There were certainly some headaches and skeletons in the closet that have informed my investment and business strategy today. For example, I no longer invest in C-class properties, and property age is a key component in my determining whether an investment is right for me or not. I just don't want to invest in older properties. It's all those unknown unknowns that get you. Furthermore, we've had all the COVID appreciation that brought up everything, A, B, and C class real estate. But from my perspective, it narrowed the spreads between C, B, and A, and the risk adjusted returns of C no longer make sense. So I invest in B class multifamily today, BB plus, newer properties that, again, aren't going to have as many headaches as, what we ran into with that particular deal. The deal itself went smoothly. It was just all the physical condition things that really wound up being our, the thorn in our side, if you will.
Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful advice. All right. So on this deal, how many partners were there, or and what was your role?
I do not remember the number of partners. It might have been 6 or 7 of us. I haven't thought about that in a little while. As far as my role in the deal, part of the asset management team, raised some investor capital. And we had calls with the property manager every week to track the progress of the deal and make sure they were staying on track, which turned out to be critical to the performance of the deal and the actual execution of the strategy. We had brought in a newer, smaller property management company that were willing and able to work with us and give us a lot of attention and work on our business plan. But there was so much to get done in terms of repairing, say, plumbing leaks that would pop up and cost a pretty significant amount of money to repair. We had some issues that took an entire building down for months and months, and we had to find tenants, alternative accommodations, and just a lot of, again, headaches related to the age of the property. And solving those headaches was really tied to staying in touch with the property manager, making sure they were keeping on track, keeping on keeping in line with where we wanted rents to be and advertising properly and all those little things that really matter. That deal to me and others subsequent to that deal demonstrated to me the importance of clear and consistent communication with your property managers, the teams on the ground, and then, of course, with your investors, communicating with them as well. But if you don't do the first part of communicating with the boots on the ground, giving them clear instructions and expectations, then you're already out to lunch. You're already in a bad spot.
Yeah, great advice, Taylor. Now, um, what about some subsequent deals? Are you still in that market, in the Texas market? Do you look everywhere? Do you have a target market? What does your buy box look like today?
Yeah, great questions. So I no longer invest in Amarillo. It's just too small of a market. It's kind of too far out there. We owned that property through the first year and a half of COVID, if memory serves. And that really demonstrated the limited job market in Amarillo in particular. There are a couple of main employment drivers, just not a diversified market generally from an economic standpoint. So big lesson there. Still worked out for us, but that highlighted a potential issue because there was a significant layoff at one of the food plants there early on in COVID. That was a big concern for us. So today we're investing in Dallas, Houston, Atlanta. We've had success in Michigan. We've also done some investing in Phoenix, although that's slowed down this year with rates being where they are and the Phoenix market generally being where it is. My business model has actually changed quite a bit as well. So I mentioned in that first deal, those first couple of deals, I was getting on the GP team, doing asset management, all those other things. But really what I wanted to do the whole time was focus on working with investors and raising investor capital. But you can't just do that as your business, right? There are laws that, you have to be licensed to be compensated for raising investor capital. So I took not a break, but like a pause for about a year of doing deals to work on reconfiguring my business and find a way to focus on raising investor capital legally so that I could sleep at night, feel good about the deals that we were doing, and present the right, opportunities to our investors and all those other things. To me, again, being able to sleep at night is very, very important and feel good about the deals that we're doing. So through producing my podcast and networking, found an opportunity to get licensed. So currently hold securities licenses. And that's what we do is we find operators and investors and build relationships and everything and raise investor capital for syndications. That's always what I really wanted to do in this space. And in order to scale the business, I think we need to build our foundation on rock rather than on sand, if you will. I know you live at the beach, but your foundation is probably built down on some pilings that are going to make sure your house doesn't slide away. So for me, part of that, building my foundation on a slab of rock, was having all the legal compliance boxes checked. And that took a while, but we got that taken care of and we're able to continue scaling.
Man, that's so cool. I just learned this about you. I didn't know that. And I am going to dive into this a little bit because I only had one other person that was registered to do this, in the past on my podcast. So let's dive a little bit. All right. With this, are you a registered agent, or do you work under a registered agent? How does it work?
So broker dealer representative is the term, broker dealer rep, if you will. The broker dealer itself is essentially the entity that supervises us, the reps, and kind of handles the transactions, does compliance and other aspects like that. Those of us that are working with the investors and raise the money, all that kind of thing, we're reps for the broker dealer.
And does this limit you to who you can raise capital for? For example, Taylor, if I called you tomorrow and said, look, man, I got a 50-unit deal. This is the best deal ever. Could you raise capital for me?
I could not. And frankly, it's funny. This was not expected for me when I first got licensed. Not that I had an expectation about this necessarily, but as you mentioned earlier, I host my own podcast and have syndicators on relatively frequently. And when most of them find out that I'm licensed to raise capital legally, they really want to jump on that because they're looking for other capital sources beyond what they can raise. Even if they personally in their own company have enough capital raising capacity, most of them want other options that they can call on if one of their current capital raising strategies comes up short. So I get a lot of interest, but the good side of the equation that puts us in control, if you will, is now I get to be an awful lot more selective about who I work with, the types of deals that we do. And honestly, I find that to be a good thing. I'd rather be in a position where we're saying no the vast majority of the times, or, no, thank you for your interest, let's stay friends type of thing, than raising for just about anybody. Because again, you get a lot of interest, but having been in this business since I started passively investing in 2016, doing all this other investing and networking and everything, you see the importance of the team, how experienced they are, how well put together they are, how concentrated they are on the particular market where they're investing, all those sorts of things. It's very important to be selective about. So I do get a lot of interest from operators, but frankly, we say no way more often than we say, yes, let's consider working together.
Are there any legal restrictions that prohibit you from working with people? Do you have to work with whoever the broker dealer is has like a relationship with? I don't really understand how it works.
So at least with our setup, yes. So our operators all go through a pretty extensive compliance investigation process, if you will, where there's background checks and site visits and all kinds of things to, make sure they're real and not a Ponzi scheme. All these other very important boxes that need to be checked and investigated. So all of our operators go through that process. Then any deal we do with them goes through its own check process as well. When you're registered to sell securities, any security transaction that you engage in selling has to be done through the broker dealer. So if you're licensed, you can't then go syndicate your own property and sell securities to investors not under the supervision of the broker dealer. That term for that is selling away. So when you're licensed, you agree to only do securities transactions through the broker dealer. That's certainly not a problem for me at all because, the sky kind of, as I mentioned before, it kind of rains operators when you can raise capital legally. Surprisingly, I certainly did not expect that. But again, those are things that you learn once you get your foot in the water.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, everybody's always looking for capital. Um, so can you kind of walk us through what it looks like from your end, how you get paid, I guess, on deals, and what your participation on that sponsorship team looks like thereafter after close?
So after the close, we're totally non-voting members. We don't have any control or anything. It's all in the operator's hands. It's a pretty common thing in this industry generally of course, there's the LP GP split. And then the GP itself will be broken up amongst several different roles and who's compensated for what. So you have certain chunk for asset management, certain chunk for underwriting and, banking relationships slash lending and all those other things, capital raising. So generally the GP is split up into different chunks, and then capital raising is divided amongst, who brings how many dollars. The That is a fairly common practice in the industry, even for folks who aren't licensed to raise capital. We're just, applying the legal process to get compensated for raising capital. So it's a pretty standardized thing in the industry, if you will. Once you get into the space and talk with syndicators, they're all aware of how to split up the GP amongst different roles. Very common. Like I said, once the deal's closed, we're, non-voting. It's just run by the operator.
Uh, uh, Before I ask this next question, do you have equity in the deal on the GP side without putting in any capital?
GP equity is part of the compensation. We do invest as LPs in these deals as well. I think that's important for alignment of interest, of course. We don't say that in our advertising for the deal, of course. That's not part of the overall security, right? This package that an investor received doesn't say anything about whether I'm investing because it's not material to the deal itself. But most of my investors want to know, hey, Taylor, are you investing in that deal? And they'll send me an email and ask. That's totally fine. But I think that's important for alignment of interest. You'll find that most operators, especially if they're really dedicated to this business and they have the ability to do so, invest in GP shares, or excuse me, invest in LP shares in their deals. Many operators, the actual GPs, the main folks on the syndication team, will be their own biggest LPs. Not everybody, but that's reasonably common. If the GPs have enough capital to be their biggest LPs, then oftentimes they are. So I think that goes across the board, whether you're somebody that's raising capital or somebody more on the operations team. Buy some LP shares and align interests.
Yeah, very well said. And it kind of led me into this point that I really like the way you did it. I really like that you're doing it the legal way, because a lot of people have on general partnership teams have it's a gray area, man. They'll have capital raisers when you can't have a capital raiser. They have to be actively participating in the deal to some degree, and it's just it just doesn't happen that way. Some people will bring capital to a deal with all intentions of being active and participating in whatever role they were given, but then don't. And I think that you really covered your butt, man, by doing that.
I think it's important to be as careful and selective as you can in that process. I had somebody on a podcast last week, a podcast I appeared on, ask me, why would somebody want to invest through a broker dealer rather than going through maybe a fund of funds? And fund of funds, they add an additional layer of fees and more syndication documents, other things along those lines. But I think that question's backwards. Why would you want to invest with someone who's blatantly ignoring securities laws and not checking all their boxes from a legal compliance standpoint? To me, that's the kind of silly thing, right? I'm on this side of the table and have the licenses at pretty significant personal expense, both in terms of time and money, because I want to do this all the right way to the best of my abilities. And, that's cost me a lot of time and money, but we're here to make money on the other side. So, I think the question is, why would a passive investor want to invest with somebody that's not following the rules? That's the more important side of that, I think.
Well said, man. Every single time somebody says to me, typically this happens with newer investors. Oh, I love capital raising. I'm a capital raiser. I hate that term unless they have the accreditation that you do with the broker dealer rep. So I don't like that. It just irks me every single time. It's just something that should not be thrown around that easily. You cannot be a capital raiser. You have to actively participate in a deal. You know.
Very common.
Yeah. So that's where the industry has come at this point, and I'm sure you've seen a lot since 2016. Uh, but it is what it is, and things are changing, and people are getting, things are unraveling at this point in time, and I'm curious to see how this goes and who weathers this storm coming up. So, Taylor, What are you focused on now? I can make assumptions, but maybe you can kind of guide us or give us some insight into what you're looking at now, or maybe you're not looking at anything, what you're focused on. And let's talk a little bit about what's happening now and into the future.
So I'm a fan of Top Gear. If anybody out there is aware of the show Top Gear, they used to have three of the greatest car presenters on it in history. At one point, excuse me, at one point, there was a segment where Richard Hammond, the one guy, was driving, I believe it was an F1 car around a track and wasn't going fast enough. The drivers and the mechanics were telling him, if you go a little bit faster, you're still going to be going too slow. Your tires won't be warm enough and you'll slide into the wall and explode. If you go a lot faster, they still won't be warm enough. You'll slide into the wall and you'll die. You need to go significantly faster in order for your tires to be warm enough to have the traction you need to make it around the track. So my goal in my business and my procedures is to emulate that as much as I can. How fast do I need to go to make sure my tires are warm enough to continue having traction to go around this track? So I have a lot of things happening right now. Mentioned before that I'm moving from 3 episodes a week to 5 episodes a week for my podcast. And you and I talked about that. I'm working on some pretty significant logistical changes on the back end as far as guest booking and editing and all the other things that podcast listeners don't see, but are very important to releasing a podcast, whether it's once a week or 5 days a week. That stuff has to get done. So that's big for me. Working on writing a book right now about passive syndication investing. And another thing that I've got in mind that I don't want to say too much about publicly yet, but we do deals with 1031 exchange investors who are moving into a tenant in common position with the syndication. And I'm working on or ideating, if you will, a platform for that type of investor who has that very specific deal structure in mind. There aren't a whole lot of those folks out there that have enough capital in their 1031 exchange, enough equity in their 1031 exchange to make it worth doing a tenant in common arrangement. But I think they're not being adequately served by the market today, unless they want to go into a DST. There's a lot out there for DSTs, but for syndications and tenant in common arrangements to be together, see a gap in the market there. So I've got a picture in my mind of what I want to build around that. And that's being, worked on as well. So driving the car really as fast as I can to keep the tires warm enough and make it around the track.
That's a cool analogy, man. I like it. Can we take a minute? I know we're kind of wrapping. We're about to wrap it up soon, but can you take a minute to kind of, I guess, explain 1031, TIC, and DST in the most layman terms possible for our listeners?
Sure. So a 1031 exchange is a way that the government has allowed investors to sell property that they own, rental property that they own, and buy replacement rental property that they own while deferring capital gains, taxes, and deferring depreciation recapture along the way. There's no cap on the amount that you can defer, and you can just 1031 over and over and over again until you die. In fact, one of my friends in the 1031 syndication space says the 4 Ds of 1031s are defer, 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 die. So you die at the end, and then your heirs get a stepped up basis and reduces the tax law. There's a lot of big advantages to dying, at least for your heirs, but you can benefit from it while you're alive. So defer that tax bill. For a tenant in common, so in order to do a 1031 exchange, you have to basically own real property. You can't 1031 exchange into a syndication because you're essentially holding a paper security in a syndication rather than deeded property. So with a tenant in common, you can basically get a part of the property and make some agreements with the syndicator. That's where a lot of the complexity comes in. In addition to the timing aspect of it, there are time restrictions to doing a 1031 exchange and a lot of other things involved. So it's a very complicated process to put together. For the 1031 exchange investor, my opinion is if you know you're going to be doing that within a year or two, and you think you might want to do a syndication tick, that's the time to start looking and exploring your options and looking at deals, so that when you're ready to sell and do your exchange, you have all the ducks in a row so that it all slides in and you can minimize the headache in that time crunch when you're doing your 1031. DST is a Delaware statutory trust. I'm not an expert on Delaware statutory trust. I went to the University of Delaware and I can't say the word Delaware. Delaware statutory trusts. Most folks find that the returns on DSTs are too low and the commissions for the folks selling DSTs are too high. I don't have firsthand experience with that. We don't do DSTs. We're not ever going to get into DSTs, I think. I'm trying to address the folks who want the advantages of a syndication, if you will, and say the multifamily space, and putting that together, learning more about the process, and putting together more of a product for them, if you will.
Cool. Taylor, that was an awesome explanation. I think it was very well said and very easy to understand. And I love it, man. Everything we talked about today was really cool. I learned so much about you, and I'm excited for this episode to air. But before we wrap this up, I have to ask you a question, and then I have to get your contact information for my listeners who would love to reach out to somebody like you. So here we go. Taylor, let's imagine it was 100 years from now. You have great grandchildren and they're running around. They're so happy and they wanted to write a book about you and your life. What would you want them to title this book? Or what characteristical traits about you would you like them to highlight in this book?
This is a really hard question. And when we talked about this before, I thought backward, what would I write about my ancestors from 1923? Well, frankly, I don't know that much about them. They would have been my grandparents' parents. I'm sure I could find their names, but I don't know their names. I don't have any pictures of them. I could probably get them, but there might be but a handful of pictures of all of them from the course of their entire lives. And they lived, long lives. Whereas for you and for me, in 100 years, there will probably be hundreds or thousands of hours of video available for free of us speaking on the internet, let alone thousands to tens of thousands of pictures. I mean, there will be a whole documentation of the vast majority of our lives. At least we'll probably start it at when Facebook started and go forward from there. So starting about 2007. Mm-hmm. So I would like for them to think that I'm genuine. So maybe the genuine investor. I try to be who I am when I'm on podcasts, for better or for worse. But I feel that when folks call me because they want to talk about a deal, they want to learn more about what we do, that they're getting the same Taylor that they heard on the podcast. And I would like for my ancestors, not my ancestors, my progenitors, I think is the term, what my descendants. Heirs. I would like for my heirs to think the same. Plus, with all the opportunity with 1031s, assuming 1031 exchanges are available to them down the road, they're going to say, man, this guy built us a pretty solid nest egg. So the genuine investor would be my answer.
Taylor, that's awesome, man. Thank you so much for sharing that. I love that perspective. Very different than anybody has ever brought to this show. So thank you for that. Got me thinking as well, and it kind of also inspired me to perhaps change this question to what would the dinner table conversation be like? Like what stories would our great grandchildren be talking about, or our grandchildren be telling our great grandchildren? Like what would they be telling them about us? What cool stories would carry on and live on for, I guess, generations to come? So thank you for helping me out with that as well.
No problem.
Taylor, let's get the listeners some form of contacting you.
Sure. So you can find more about my podcast and learn about investing with us at passivewealthstrategy.com. Or if you want to send me an email, taylor@ntcapitalgroup.com.
Wonderful. Taylor, it has been a, really nice time speaking with you for the past couple hours. We've been hanging out and talking and learning about each other. I'm excited to continue speaking with you and building a relationship with you. I think you're a wonderful, genuine guy. So thank you so much for joining me today, and you have a great day, my friend.
Thanks, you too.
All right. Hey, Small Axe community. I would like to say thank you for listening to another episode of my podcast where we show you how to use your small axe to build a lasting empire. Now, if you liked what you heard, it would mean the world to me if you would subscribe, leave a 5-star rating, and write a review. Also, if you want to get in touch with me, go to my website at smalaxecommunities.com. Book a call with me. And until the next episode, keep sharpening those axes.